Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome to the Hollywood Studios parking lot. We're gonna have a conversation in the time that it takes me to walk back to the Jeep. So I got a question a little while ago asking about whether or not I prefer driving to the parks versus taking Disney transportation. And look, here's the thing. I live here, so I am always driving to the parks. But whenever I vacationed, I always took Disney transportation because I always flew in, so I never had access to a car. Also, I currently take Disney transportation whenever possible because I prefer it, but kind of getting where we're going before we've even started, right? So my opinion is that Disney transportation is far superior to driving yourself to the parks, at least for most people. There are, of course, always going to be exceptions to this. You know, there are some people who might prefer to drive in because they have mobility needs and it's just easier to bring their own stuff. And the list of specific reasons that you might prefer to drive yourself in goes on. But generally speaking, if you have the option to take Disney transportation, I recommend that you do that versus driving in. And the reason, at least in my opinion, is just that it's a much more pleasant experience to take Disney transportation than it is to drive yourself. Now I know there are going to be a ton of you who are saying, hold on, Kat, I don't want to get in a bus, on a Skyliner, in the monorail, whatever the case may be, in order to get where I'm going. I just want to drive my own car. It would just be so much nicer, so much easier. Okay, fair. I too like to jam out on my way in and out of the parks. But of all the things that I don't like about driving in, it's actually not the drive or any of that, although it can be a little bit stressful. Because the truth of the matter, which most people won't talk about because it's kind of an uncomfortable reality, is that a lot of people who are driving here, they're not from here. And so it can be a little sketchy sometimes, especially during busy times of the year with people who don't necessarily know where they're going. You're more likely to be cut off and it can be a little bit stressful to drive in. I'm just being real with you. But that aside, the biggest problem that I have with driving into the parks isn't the drive, it's the getting to and from the parks. See, here at Walt Disney World, they have surface parking lots, which means you're just in a large open parking lot completely exposed to the elements. Like the sun, which by the way, is really, really toasty. And because you're parked with so many other vehicles, which have all been running sometimes for long periods of time, plus all of the shiny metal, it really radiates heat. So it can be at least 10 degrees hotter in the parking lots than it is actually outside the parking lots or in the parks. And that's a really important factor to consider because it's within this hot parking lot that you're going to spend 5, 10, sometimes even 20 minutes getting to and from wherever it is that you've parked for the day. Now, they do absolutely have trams. Can you use those trams? Yes, during some times of the day. Also, it's important to keep in mind that the trams don't run to all of the areas of the parking lot. So depending on where you're parked, you're still gonna have to do a little bit of walking and the trams aren't air conditioned or anything like that. So this is especially notable if you're here during the summer months and you're gonna be spending a lot of time in the parks. It's one of the reasons that when we've had conversations about transportation before, I always say, you have to leave before you get hot, particularly if you're driving yourself. Get yourself a cold drink, cool off before you make the walk back to the car because this walk can be brutal and it can really ruin the rest of your day, sometimes the rest of your vacation, depending on the condition that you're in. I'll be real with you too. This is the type of thing that dictates where I go, when I go, and how I do it. So when I talk about rope dropping and I say that it's so beneficial to rope drop for a number of reasons, but especially because you can get good parking, this is why. Because the closer you can get to the front of the parking lot, closer you can get to that prime parking in the front of the gate, the less time it takes you to get back to your car if you're hot in the midday or if you're tired at the end of the day. And that's a game changer. And you don't really have to think about that too much when you're taking Disney transportation because you can pick that transportation up so much closer to the front of the park, but also that transportation tends to be air conditioned with a few rare exceptions, the Skyliner being one of them. Now, just like with everything else, this isn't going to be a big deal to everybody. For some people, this is going to be small potatoes. They really just want to drive themselves, and that's awesome. For me, I prefer to take Disney transportation. It's easier, it's less stress, especially if you're a nervous driver. Have I mentioned that already? I know I've said this in the past, but another thing that I think is really important to keep in mind, I know I did mention that it can be a little hectic to drive in and out of the parks, but if you're someone who's going to be stressed out by driving into the parks and all the traffic and the other drivers who aren't sure where they're going either, this can just be extra stress on your day that you don't need. You could just get on a bus, get on a monorail, get on a boat, get on the Skyliner, and then get off when you get where you're going. That can just be so much easier and much less stress. And that leads to better Disney days because there's enough stress to be had inside the park. You don't really need another element of stress, do you? Now, of course, I have thoughts on each park individually. Some parks I think are easier to drive into, especially when we're talking about specific times of day than others. I can't stand driving to Magic Kingdom, for example. There are times of the year where I just won't go. Certainly not in the daylight hours, because it's just too much. It's too hot, it takes too long to get in, and it's not for me. Other parks I think are great gateways. Hollywood Studios is one of them, which is actually where we are today, because I can park here early in the morning, get pretty close to the front, and have access to so many different Disney transportation options that I can go pretty much anywhere I want with relative ease. So it really just depends on your situation, the circumstance, and what it is that you're willing to do and the hoops you're willing to jump through. But for me, if I have a choice, it's going to be Disney transportation all the way. Even with all of its flaws, it is just so much better, in my opinion, than driving. But you know what? I want to know what you have to say. What's your opinion when it comes to driving in and why? Particularly if you have the choice. Maybe you're staying on property already. Would you prefer to drive your own car or take Disney transportation? I understand there are a number of you who might be staying off property and it's just more convenient or honestly the option that is available to you to drive in. But if that's not you, you happen to be staying on property, you have access to Disney transportation as well as your own vehicle, which route are you going? I'd love to hear your thoughts in a comment down below, and I'm sure others would love to as well. But I think that's all for now. Thanks for joining me for this discussion. As always, I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say, and I hope that you'll join me on our next adventure because I'm sure it's going to be a blast. Until then, bye guys.